academic and professional excellence fellowship and is visiting faculty at the University of South Dakota, Vermillion, USA. Welcome, sir, to the podium. Our first panelist is Professor Dr. G. Kumar, Advisor CPCR, former Vice Chancellor, Central University of Kerala, Kasaragod. He is a leading political scientist and a psychologist. Dr. Gokumar specializes in the areas of international relations, comparative politics, and Indian politics. He has published 12 books and over 145 research articles. He has also been the Dean of Social Sciences and Professor, Head of the Department of Political Science at the University of Kerala. He is a UGC Emeritus Fellow, ICSSR Senior Fellow, and has more than 41 years of teaching experience in political science at the university level. Welcome, sir, to the dais. Our second panelist, Dr. Harinda Sekhan, will be joining us virtually. She is a strategic and foreign policy analyst. She was a consultant and senior fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation from 2014 to 2020. She has over 3 decades of research, writing, and teaching experience on various aspects of Indo-U.S. relations, U.S. policy and strategy in Asia, and regional security challenges in South and East Asia. From 2004 to 2013, she was Senior Fellow, U.S. Studies Program at the Observer Research Foundation, ORF. Before that, Dr. Sekhan worked as an intelligence and strategic analyst with the National Security Council Secretariat, Government of India, for 2 years. Welcome, ma'am. Our panelist three is Mr. Aditya Ramanathan, Associate Fellow, Takshashila Institution, Bangalore. He is a fellow at the Takshashila Institution and a journalist by training. He has previously worked at Mint and as a freelancer. Mr. Ramanathan has a master's degree in journalism from the University of Maryland, USA. At Takshashila, he works on issues related with strategic affairs and foreign policy. His current areas of focus include nuclear weapon policy and Indian space and maritime strategies. He also works on Takshashila's India-U.S. partnership initiatives. Welcome. Welcome to the guys. We have the panel ready, and now handing over the dais to Professor Dr. Joseph P. the chair. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. This is a seminar. I think the session immediately after lunch is the most particularly for the participants for obvious reasons. But I know we have a very good panel who will be speaking to some of the very significant dimensions of India-US relations. See, there are many gray areas in our relationship with the US, particularly in geopolitics. We have many differences, as is very much visible in the current issues, contemporary world issues. We have differences over how to restructure the world order and what is our perspectives on a rule-based order and how to, deal with the common strategic. What we discuss in this session, particularly how we strengthen our relationship through civil society and diaspora. So these are two ever bright spot in our relationship. We know Indo-U.S. relations, we are natural allies, particularly for the common values that we share on democracy. So the shared values play a very important role. And as we know, as the largest democracy and the best democracy, both these countries are a kind of paradise of civil society organizations. And Indians are quite active in very many ways in multiple sectors of civil society and diaspora. And diaspora, we know, we have the Indian community is very much, the presence of Indian community is primarily through diaspora, apart from other regions. So our contributions or our presence in the NASA or in the medical sector or in students community. So that is quite strong. And as democracies, we know the civil society organizations play a very important role. In fact, apart from the relationship at the governmental level, it is actually a relationship between the people of two countries. And civil society organizations in the presence make it very, very strong. The democracy, see, that is why you see in some of the surveys we find the Americans are loved the most, or they have Indians have the second most favorable opinion about the America. So Americans are loved most by America and secondly by Indians in some of the surveys. Similarly, the feeling the people of India have towards America is also very, very, very strong. So that is, I think, a very strong factor, and this has been on the increase. So though there have been many differences on a number of issues, the people-to-people contact, the appreciation for these two countries, among the people of these two countries have been quite strong, and it is on the increase despite the differences at other levels. I think that is why these two areas, civil society and democracy or diaspora, is very significant in our relationship. So whatever gray areas we have in our relationship, I am sure we would be able to make up those areas and strengthen our relationship through civil society contacts and diaspora relationship, and which has been a very, very significant factor in our relationship. We have three panelists, as you know, in our program, and they would be answering or kind of discussing, as is already pointed out, how can civil society organizations, institutions help in building relations between two nations, between two countries. And then we also would be discussing on role played by the diaspora. How is it important for any country to advance its national interests and how that figures in India-U.S. relations. So this is quite significant, and we have three speakers. We have Professor Gopakumar, we have Dr. Harinder Shekhon would be joining virtually, and we have Mr. Aditya Ramnath. So each speaker would be speaking for around 20 minutes. And towards the end, we will take questions and discussion, and we'll have a discussion on this. So let me invite Professor Gopakumar, who is also my teacher. He taught me, so it is always a pleasure to invite you and an honor to invite Professor Gopakumar.
Thank you, Dr. Yosodi, Chairman of the session. I must also share my happiness and extend my gratitude to CPPR and Dr. Dhaniraj for inviting us and giving us the platform to reflect upon some of the potential areas of bilateral relations between the two major countries. We have witnessed in the morning session a discussion in the shadow of the Ukraine war. That was but natural. But when we discuss about the scope for building up and fostering relations for the future, I think we have to consider the past as well as the present and the future. All these aspects have to be taken into consideration, and particularly we should focus upon the expected role of civil society organizations and diaspora movements in bridging the gap and improvising the relationship. They also let us say that despite being large democracies, we have not explored the potential of civil society organization in the proper manner, which would have facilitated improvement of relations between the two countries. Professor Cox had mentioned about the estranged democracies at a time when we were also democracies. Now we are discussing about engaging democracies. But what happened to the role that diaspora and civil society movements could have played? I think much of it we lost a lot of time, particularly during the Cold War period, and the kind of policies that both countries adopted. in a way, United States did not appreciate our non-alignment policy. With the end of the Cold War, there has been a paradigm shift, and followed by the developments, the rise of terrorism, September 11, 2001 developments, they have witnessed a very big change in the bilateral relationships. It also coincided with the discussion of improving trade, investment, cultural relations, and also the most controversial one, civil nuclear relationships. Fortunately, in a couple of years, by 2007, the civil nuclear agreement has come into place, and followed by India's expectation of support from the United States as far as our admission to nuclear supplies group, and further our own request, which was ably supported by President Obama, that India must have a place in the Security Council as a permanent member. So all these demands show that the ice has melted and there is a positive temperament in the improvement of Indo-U.S. ties. As described in the morning, most of the areas we have covered as far as bilateral relationships are concerned, which include trade and investment, space, energy, defense, strategic, maritime, cultural. So almost all areas were explored, and we will continue to explore such areas. But nevertheless, there are certain areas of conflict and divergences still looming large between the two countries. And it is exactly here I think civil society organizations can help a lot on controversial areas. Of course, on Indo-Pacific and strategic significance, I think there won't be much conflict because, as Ashish Telly rightly mentioned, when it comes to Indo-Pacific, the national interests of both United States and India converges together. The answer is, the response is very clear. Absolutely, the emergence of China as a maritime power and a regional power in Indo-Pacific has brought the proximity for improving the relationship. So much before the Quad has come, the debate about Indo-Pacific caught attention of both the countries, and now we have the Quad as well as many other potential areas where the maritime cooperation can be improved further between these two countries. But let me briefly say that areas of divergences are still very pertinent. We know very well on issues of climate change and sustainable development, both countries have divergent opinions. The Ambassador was mentioning that we should find out some way of throwing out the greenhouse gas emission. Unless we achieve some technological leeway, the acquisition of each other of reducing the carbon emission becomes more of critical nature and may not bring much of what we are expected, whether it was from the Kyoto Protocol or up to the days of Paris climate change. I think there are areas of strong divergences between the two countries on climate change and sustainable development. Now, there are areas where Americans' protectionist policy, particularly during the Trump period, we were expecting, contrary to the belief that Democrats had created more problems in bilateral relationship, the protectionist policy on trade and the objection of India in completely opening the market for American trade provoked President Trump, and also his protectionist policy on H-1B visa also created another important dimension for this controversy. So, as far as these issues are concerned, I think we need to work further and to see how both the bilateral interests as well as the national interests can be protected and sustained. And coming to the issue of human rights, I think today morning also there has been so much of debate on this issue. Both countries are democratic in nature and they are expected to show more democratic aspirations, and we do have almost all the institutions that are required for democracy, whether it is media or civil society organizations or cultural organizations or independent judiciary and other aspects that are required for the sustenance of civil society. Both countries do not lag behind. But when it comes to acquisition of human rights in both the countries, whether it is between foreign secretary or secretary of state, ultimately there are many movements at the local level who may continue to allege about the human rights violations. So, for example, the Federation of Indian American Christian Organizations of North America has recently come out with a very strong allegation about the misuse of human rights by the Indian government. And similarly, there are many other organizations and movements which continue to criticize India for not protecting the minorities. So it is highly debatable, and the George Floyd issue also had created sentiments across the continent. And as we also found it essential that we should also criticize the United States for their poor record in upholding multiculturalism. Because it moved from multiculturalism to melting pot, even without creating a proper identity of what constitutes the melting pot concept. And this also provoked more issues, and as a result of which, despite being multicultural, both United States with a recent history of modernized multicultural character, India with a deep history of multicultural the minorities in both these countries, whether it is relating to minorities in India or relating to the minorities like Afro-Americans and others in the United States, we can also continue the blame game. And this exactly here you find civil society movements becoming a pawn in the interest of either industrialists or the political leadership or some other group. So this is something that we have to take it up very, very seriously. Regarding Kashmir issue also, we can find how sensitive and controversial the whole issue is. We can understand during the Cold War period, there has been a big shift between India and the United States as well as the whole Kashmir problem was concerned. The position took by the United States during the Cold War period was not at all supportive of India. And even in the United Nations, we faced several embarrassing situations as far as Kashmir is concerned. Now, what to do now? As Ambassador rightly mentioned, we can't do anything more on that because Kashmir has been and will remain as an integral part of India forever. And if we compromise Kashmir, then how can we say that we are a secular society, we are a multicultural society? So it is not possible to buy anything more on Kashmir. Finding a solution to the Kashmir is a real way out, particularly how we can protect the interest of, say, the Hindu Pandits who forcibly migrated from Srinagar and the valley, and also the concerns of other minorities like Buddhists also. So much of those stories have not come into proper way. I have a feeling that while during the Cold War was at its peak, Indian ability to lobby before the United Nations as well as America was not at all very effective. We failed rather in properly convincing before the American audience about the kind of expectation that we have about of India's democracy. As a Fulbrighter, I had seen during some of the oldest social studies textbooks, which in the United States, which was mentioning about India's probability to become a communist nation in the aftermath of nuclear Pokhran 1, 1974, and followed by the feeling that Indira Gandhi may declare a one-party state in the country and move, because we are already aligned to Soviet Union. So I was wondering, despite being a very strong democracy and having the ability to collect information from India, what could have prompted the textbook writers to think that India will become a USSR? So this kind of feeling and the kind of, on the other side, India's inability to lobby hard. And that is where I say that as far as Kashmir issue is concerned, until the end of Cold War, our position, our lobbying before the international audience was very, very weak. And now we find definitely a very big shift. And that is also supported by the post-September 11 developments. And also we took very clear decisions and we have a very clear, firm policy as far as Kashmir is concerned, and its trifurcation, practically bifurcation into two union territories, and the assumption that Kashmir will regain the state status once militancy dies down. It's a very clear message that India wanted to convey, not only to Pakistan, but to the whole world about India's position on Kashmir. So I think there has to be, we have to clear our misunderstandings on this issue and further improvise on the kind of strategic autonomy we have developed, particularly once we abandon the non-aligned movement policy and move more towards strategic autonomy. We have made it very clear that by per se India's deep philosophy and faith in international peace and collective security, and our belief that pacifism should be the way through which international order can be created. But we are living in a highly disorderly world wherein peace cannot be implemented or achieved in a sustainable manner as we expect. As we have seen when the Ukraine war occurred, the whole credibility of the United Nations was put into big question. And it continues to challenge more the United Nations than any other country for that matter. And we have taken a very strategic decision on that. And I think it has been well explained why India has to take a position of not completely blaming Russia on the one side, but on the other, appealing very much that the approach of Russia was condemnable, and at the same time, India wanted to keep its friendship with Russia because our dependence on oil has become a very important factor. Defense equipments have become another important factor. So on all of these counts, this is what strategic autonomy also means. If United States assure defense equipments to us, it will be followed by conditionalities. That is our dilemma. The dilemma before us, how can we ensure a complete defense cooperation despite we have been elevated as a powerful strategic partnership as far as defense is concerned? Are we sure that we will get that kind of equipments and weapons that we deserve at the proper time? And how it happened that the F-16 nuclear weapon fighting weapons were given to Pakistan by United States. A very powerful 8 important weapons were given to Pakistan. So we are at a loss to understand how an irresponsible nation can be armed by a strong democracy. And these are areas where civil society should debate. Why is it that we did not discuss that Pakistan fails in achieving democracy, the role that army plays there, despite army being very happy with United States, so long as the defense cooperation of Pakistan and United States is concerned. So we have not only a China question, we do also have a Pakistani question. And I think that is what the audience at the global level should understand properly. And that is where we need to discuss further on these aspects. So I mentioned about the nuclear supply group and the obsession of India's nuclear possession, which of course had been cleared by the civil nuclear agreement in 2007. And now we expect that our membership will be given after some time by the NSC group. And also that President Trump took away our special trade status because they found that American market is not exposed to Indian consumer goods and vice versa. And that also compelled Trump to become a little more protectionist as far as concerned. So I don't find much difference between Democratic Party and Republican Party as far as the national interest of that country, of the United States is concerned. There was a time when the Republicans were more concerned about shallow national interest and Democrats were more concerned about internationalism. But those days are now moving out because there are so much of realignments happening within the two parties, political parties, and therefore Democrats and Republicans, of course, they have a commitment to the nation. Their national interests are very, very important. Importing oil from Russia and Iran also had offended United States. And in the context of Ukraine war, there was also a threat of catch-up and the feeling that the kind of sanctions that United States may impose may extend even to India. So that kind of threat, I think, will not help much. As I quote Clinton on 2 counts. One, that he admitted that the sanctions imposed on India in the wake of Pokhran II had offended business interests of America more than India. And secondly, Obama's famous statement, Clinton's famous statement, Indians had given more to America than what America had given to India. So this is where diaspora comes into picture. Clinton was highlighting the significance of diaspora only. But have we utilized them properly? We do have a lot of associations in the United States at the regional level, at the national level. Even Keralites have also organized a federation of Keralites organizations in North America. FUCAN and other organizations are there. But how strong are these civil society organizations, particularly in improvising bilateral relationship? Much of India's credibility attained before the American audience came practically after Pokhran II. Until then, the conventional feeling that it's a country of poor people, poverty-stricken people, snake charmers and elephant riders, those kind of conventional feeling has changed once India proved its ability in achieving scientific developments and other kinds of breakthroughs. And now that has come before the United States, and the Indian diaspora proudly saying that this is a country that has grown up. And particularly after 1991, once our economy opened up further, and the continuous growth of India, and how we were able to promote further in liberal trade, and also the kind of business and cultural association organizations and the development that we built up over the period. So the last 30 years has shown Indian economy moving further and producing probably the second largest middle class in the world after China. The United States middle class will be lower than India's population of middle classes. So this shows India's march towards an economic growth and development, and with the kind of economic and development that is happening across the country. The kind of scientific and cultural growth, the expansion in the field of education and trade and science and technology, all has attracted the United States' attention. And of course, these are the two countries that should engage more in all these areas, whether it is trade or energy or investment, we need to work upon. But if we leave it to politicians, I think then there will be a lot of other aspects that come in the way. So that is where exactly civil society organizations should play a role, and also diaspora should play a role. But my observation of American as well as Indian civil society organization, I have two feelings. Number one, despite being a strong civil society in the United States, its concern about other countries, particularly about India, has been very shallow in nature, in the sense that regional and national interests overshadow the interests of the civil society organizations. On the other side, coming to India, I won't say that Indian civil society is strong at all. We don't have a strong civil society movement, except we will have certain urban organization at the education level and trade business organization. The ability to penetrate the root at the grassroots level has been very dismal. So as a result of this, civil society in India is not strong. We do have still a traditional dominance. That is why religion and communalism plays a very important role in Indian politics. So we admit that. But the path towards progress and development, I think we should tap the potentiality of civil society, and that is where India should work upon. And with the United States and also the diaspora, Indian diaspora in America can also extend their friendship and relationship in promoting better relationship between these two countries. So civil society organization diaspora, my argument is that we need to go a long way, but we have not utilized it properly. And we also to clear a lot of misunderstanding between these two countries and excessive kind of political rhetoricism, particularly the criticism about human rights record between these two countries will end up only in blame game, and that will not benefit the future of engagement between these two democracies. So, as I would say that being democracies, being multicultural, being pro-liberal, with kind of multicultural feelings and values, we can definitely promote shared values. And these shared values can strengthen and deepen our relationship. At the same time, national interests are also paramount for both the countries. And our strategic autonomy principle suggests that we need to protect our national interests, particularly when we are surrounded by a very tough neighborhood in South Asia. And further that we need energy. This is a country hungry for energy. We need to depend upon other countries. So we cannot put all our eggs in one basket. and it is very, very clear on that. And that explains the strategic autonomy, why we need. At the same time, the scope for relations are still there, but we need to work upon that. And it's exactly here, we need to open up the new chapters of diaspora and civil society in this part. Thank you very much.
How we have not completely exploited the huge potential of civil society organizations, not only improving our relationship, but also empowering the people who have an understanding of the relationship between these two countries. So we'll be taking questions towards the end. I think, should I invite or you will be inviting all back? Okay, I think you can move to the next speaker, Dr. Harry, the second who is waiting on that. Please. Dr. Harry, you may be speaking for 20 minutes.
Am I audible now? Good afternoon. Am I audible? Good afternoon. I'm sorry about that glitch, which I think we were playing all at sea. First of all, I must thank the CPPR and especially Dr. Dhanaraj for giving me this opportunity. Unfortunately, I came down with COVID earlier in the month and I'm unable to travel, though I tested negative, but I think the after effects have prevented me, still lingering effects in the form of a cold and slight sore throat. So my loss that I'm not there physically, but all the same, I'll try and make up by this shorter presentation. I enjoyed listening to Dr. Gopakumar. It was a, sorry. Am I visible now? Okay, so Professor Gopakumar has made a detailed presentation about about the role of civil society and the diaspora, how it can be a bottleneck as well as a facilitating force in leading towards stronger US-India relations, and I could not agree more with him. But since he's talked more, but I think I am going to start from the point as to where our relations were 2 decades ago and where we've come. The recent crisis, the global crisis, the Ukraine war has shown that US-India relations today are extremely mature, and we have been able to manage our differences in the current global scenario. The US, the recently concluded 2+2 or 3+3 dialogue, as it is being called, has shown that the US respects the strategic choices India has had to make because of the difficult neighborhood we live in. And there is greater understanding about the challenges India faces in its neighborhood. The 3 main issues that come to mind are Afghanistan, where we had very serious differences. And I think we were not on the same page as to what the US policy would lead to, and India was proven right. Ukraine and Russia, again, there was pressure, and there is pressure from civil society also within the United States that India should take a more forthright point of view in condemning Russia. But we have played a very balanced and a nuanced role and taken a stance in the United Nations, which I think makes us stand very clear that we do not, we want the world, the countries to respect global boundaries, but at the same time, we walk a tightrope. US-India relations from where we were in 1998 when Pokhara happened And today, I think we have reached a very comfortable stage. 1998, sanctions were imposed upon India. But today we have, we enjoy bipartisan support and approval across both the political parties, across the Senate, the Congress, and this is testified by the fact that in March and April, I mean, look at the various high delegations, high-powered delegations which have visited New Delhi in the last 2 months. And there is a regular exchange between delegations, and the dialogue is of a very at a very high level. When it comes to the diaspora, I'm going to speak more about the diaspora. I think the Modi government did well. The Prime Minister seized upon the potential of the diaspora, and most of his visits to the United States, beginning with the public event at the New York Central Park, followed by the one at the Silicon Valley on his second visit, and of course the big mega rally in Houston the last time, with taking President Trump around the stadium. All these testify to the fact that the Indian diaspora has arrived. It has made an impact in the. It is a force to reckon with, both as both for India and the United States. And I think it has become an important, not only a source of funding, but the vote bank in a democracy. The diaspora has played a very important role. And then in Ahmedabad, again, when the former President Trump visited India in 2020, the over 100,000 people in the Moderna Stadium in Ahmedabad has shown that the diaspora has played a very important role in creating a very positive momentum in US-India relations, and has touched upon different aspects of this relationship. Over here, I would argue that the first time this role of the diaspora was visible in creating a positive momentum in US-India relations was during the nuclear deal. When the nuclear deal was being debated in 2007 and 2008. So it was Indians in large numbers who went to the Capitol. They lobbied congressmen. They spoke to senators and created a very positive momentum. And I think this is where, taking off from here, the diaspora started playing a very important role in US-India relations. But as Professor Gopakumar mentioned, this is not a very stable role so far. And I think there's a lot of legwork, groundwork to be done, because once the nuclear deal was signed and the Indian diaspora just disappeared and went back, the people went back to their vocations, and there was no sustained effort even by the government of India to engage with the diaspora in a sustained manner. There's no organization like the Israelis. The Jews have the IPAC and other associations. The Indian diaspora, on the other hand, works in a very voluntary kind of a capacity. So what you find is that they come together when there is, or they're mobilized when there is an event. And after that, you really do not hear about the diaspora collectively doing something or engaging with government, either in the United States or in India. Especially in India, it becomes a big problem. I think the US is a more open system. And when you speak with the Indian diaspora, they say that they find it much more easier to engage with their local congressmen. That, unfortunately, I think is not the case here in India, because our members of parliament live in their ivory towers and they are quite unapproachable. So I think this is where a disconnect is. And on our end, we really need to correct this lacuna in forging relations, not just with the United States, but in building up public opinion and support with any other country or on any critical issue. But you cannot, but the soft power between India and the United States has remained unsurpassed. It has always been an important element in US-India relations. Excuse me. Even during the height of the Cold War, the Nixon years, which were the worst. But I think the soft power between people to people contact remained strong. Every Indian, I think Indian family, especially in the North, it was a joke amongst the Punjabis that there is a son who's a farmer and there is a child who's in the United States, either studying or engaged in some vocation. And so that was the kind of connect, we have grown up watching. And the soft power and the American dream is something which every Indian aspires to even today. So the technical qualified people who wanted, who sought to go to the United States, study, work, adopt the place, all that happened right from the 70s to the 80s during the height of the Cold War. But coming to more recent times, what has happened is over the years that the diaspora, the Indian diaspora, today has emerged, according to US reports and US figures, it has emerged as the most highly educated, professionally qualified, and they're also the highest taxpayers amongst all the ethnic groups in the United States today. So this shows that the diaspora enjoys a great deal of clout. The Silicon Valley drives the economy of the Silicon Valley. You have Indians heading a number of US corporates. You have Indians in the US administration. Excuse me, my throat seems to be packing up. So what we have is the growing visible role of the Indians. And I think this is an important development which has taken place in the last 15 years or so between India and the United States. But what the Senate India caucus has played an important role as well, and the congressional committees. I've met with the India caucus and all on my various visits to Washington. And I think there is a great deal of sensitivity to India's concerns on a number of critical issues. Of course, the soft power also translated, I think the first time was in 2004 when the tsunami happened and India took the lead in providing aid to the tsunami hit areas. And it worked shoulder to shoulder, not just with the United States, but even with China in rushing relief. And more recently, I think the COVID vaccine diplomacy has shown that India and the United States, apart from engaging strategically, are also working in vaccine diplomacy, which India started. So these positives in US-India relations help us navigate many of the challenges which keep coming up. And I think Professor Gopakumar talked about at great length. And since I'm not keeping so well, I will not repeat that. But the challenges of trade, H-1B visa issues, which are not going to go away any soon because the US and India have been at loggerheads over these two critical issues for quite some time. And but hopefully, they'll build a progressive a momentum to overcome and find something which is mutually acceptable and mutually beneficial by engaging more at the grassroots level with civil society. So the role of civil society therefore becomes an important aspect amongst the two democracies. And excuse me, amongst the two democracies. But unfortunately, in India, the focus of, as was mentioned earlier, civil society movement is not much developed in India, and they work in isolation. And whatever civil society organizations are there, they have been focused more on domestic issues, issues of rural governance, etc. And the sector has not been able to define, the civil society sector in India has not been able to define its relationships and relationship and terms of engagement with foreign policy. We are yet to evolve this, strategy where we mesh civil society and mesh the domestic and foreign policy areas where we can work together. So foreign policy still continues to remain conducted largely by the government. But what has fortunately happened, you see, apart from civil society, it is, and the diaspora, we must never underestimate the role that the think tanks and academia have played in strengthening and furthering US-India relations and help build synergies on a number of critical issues, both strategic and economic. And higher education in higher education, I think India's opening up and has allowed US universities to collaborate and open institutes, open their chapters here in India, which is a good move because it could be a win-win situation for both. In India, like higher education is something which is not up to the mark considering our population and the aspirations of our youth. We need to skill them. And by education, I mean not just degrees in education. One area where we really need to look together is the area of skill development in India. Rather than open institutions which are going to dole out PhDs and degrees like graduation and post-graduation, the Prime Minister has envisioned starting smart cities, make in India. So I think what we need is to skill our youth. Start supply chain, the supply chain issue is a huge issue in India. And this would go a long way, if you can have more youth given technical training in managing the supply chain of the big stores like your Walmarts and all coming to India. And so that is something which would really impact upon people-to-people contacts further in a positive manner. And this is something which I think we should look at when we are discussing and speaking amongst ourselves at the think tank level, at the academic level, and give this policy input to the government. And this is something which means involving the corporate sector, and in India, it's the corporates through the corporate social responsibility who are fully committed. And smaller countries like Taiwan are doing so much in India when it comes to skill development. And Japan also, is giving the technical know-how. But I think the US and India have a huge potential to look at these areas of artificial intelligence and how to make skilling in the areas of medical, hospital management, because we have these huge health concerns and health issues, portable drinking water for the masses. So how do we bring technology for portable drinking water into India, and how do we collaborate? So these are the kind of areas where India and the United States can encourage people-to-people contacts. And this is something which is going to touch the lives of the ordinary Indians who live in rural areas. And that is an untapped potential, which really needs to be looked at. The strategic stuff, of course, will happen and continue to grab eyeballs and headlines in newspapers. But I think the real role of civil society and diaspora, the energies should be focused in actually advancing, modernizing India where it is most needed. I will end now. There was a lot more I wanted to speak, but I think I'm having a problem. I'm literally choking as I speak, but I would like to come back into the Q&A later on. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks to CPPR and the US CG for making this important conference possible. Uh, Being the third speaker on an afternoon panel, I do run the risk of putting everyone to sleep. So I will try and keep my comments brief in general, and we'll have more discussions if necessary, the Q&A. So broadly, I think my two preceding panelists have covered most of the important issues. What I'll do is actually just recast some of their comments in a little differently, and talk about some areas where I think civil society can contribute. So firstly, I think civil society is crucial to the challenges ahead for both India and the US and for their relationship. The good news is that civil society is actually a strong component of this particular relationship. If you look at other important or key partnerships that India has, like that with Russia and even with China, that component simply doesn't exist. And broadly, I define civil society as encompassing business associations, industry bodies, think tanks, academia. We also have, of course, the diaspora and to a lesser extent, media. Uh, just to provide some context to where I'm coming from for this, I think that there are two key pillars to the India-US partnership. One is the convergence that we have specifically in the Indo-Pacific, and even more specifically about concerns about the rise of China. We don't see a lot of convergence in many other areas strategically. You do have some convergence in the Middle East of late, but India would, for example, like to pursue productive relations with Iran. You also, of course, see strategic convergence as we're seeing with Russia, Ukraine. The other key pillar and is really the economy, and the economy has often been described as the sort of ballast in the relationship that keeps it afloat even in difficult times. We all know the stats. I'll just give you a minor anecdote. I live in Bangalore, and at least in the pre-pandemic days, Bangalore is infamous for its traffic. But around the July 4th weekend, it would become really easy to drive around Bangalore. And that's simply because a lot of people going to work, commuting every day, are on leave because it's the July 4th weekend. And that, I think, highlights the sort of deep relationship that some cities in India have to the United States. Now, 2 decades ago, the economic relationship between India and the US was booming. IT and IT-enabled services were expanding at growth rates that we're probably not likely to see again. But the convergence with China was sort of tepid. America was involved in the wars on terror and so on. That's sort of changed today. It's in fact reversed. We have strong convergence with China, but the economic piece is tepid today. And part of that is simply natural. It's the maturing of the IT-enabled services industry and so on. But there's also obviously some key changes in the global economic order and the international order, really. And we're seeing, I think, the other context we need to understand is that there is that we are in between world orders, essentially. You had the unilateral moment of the United States from about 1989 and then the 1990s, and we're sort of transitioning into something else. We don't know what that is exactly. Some people in India would like to see a multipolar world. I'm not sure we're there yet, and it's not clear what's going to come next. And so, for example, we are unlikely to see a big, global WTO multilateral trade deal. So the question is, what do you do? How, for example, do you continue to have key productive economic partnerships? How do you import and export the way you need to create jobs in India? And I think the answer lies in creating sort of bubbles of trust. And what we mean by that is you basically have preferential trade with partners with whom you have some degree of geopolitical convergence. So an obvious candidate for this would be the Quad states. Now, India is a sort of the odd one out in the Quad in the sense that the other three members are all treaty allies of some sort. But at the same time, the India-U.S. relationship is, I think, ultimately the linchpin of the Quad. And I think that, the goal should be, for example, to use the Quad and to create the nucleus for some sort of informal trade agreement that enables, basically enables the flow of goods and services once again. I think this applies to the high technology sector as well. We've talked a lot, we've heard a lot of talk about supply chain resilience in recent times. So you want these supply chains to be resilient, you want to protect them from actions of adversaries, and you also want to make sure that they're not dominated by your adversaries. I think that the India-US relationship is very useful in this respect. For example, on semiconductors, it would be great if these countries were able to use their comparative advantages to full effect. So India has a lot of the human power that's required for integrated circuit design. The US has both design and manufacturing capabilities. And if you look at the other Quad states, Japan can provide a lot of the manufacturing material, Australia can provide a lot of the raw material. So there is an opportunity to use the India-US relationship as the starting point for creating some sort of informal but effective new order that would perhaps come into fruition only many decades from now. And finally, I will add that the other area where, because we're in this transition, the other area where we need to turn our attention is actually arms control. Arms control is not talked about a lot in India, but what we've seen of late is not terribly good news. The Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty are both now extinct, and there's nothing really to replace them. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, you can have as many conferences as you want, but it's really irrelevant to the realities of our times. So what we should look at is, what replaces this old decrepit arms control structure. And I think that's another potential area for cooperation between India and the US. It was a source of friction, but I think in the future it can be a source of cooperation. Now, the point I want to make here is that none of this can really be done by governments alone. Governments can fairly regulate a technology as it evolves, or when new business models show up. Even military struggle to incorporate emerging technologies into their doctrines. So to make any of this possible, to make this technology cooperation possible, to make arms control negotiations possible, and even broader economic relationship possible, you are going to have to involve civil society. And over here, I'm talking specifically about really industry bodies, business associations, think tanks, and academia, the policy community. The advantage of, for example, academia and think tanks is that they're great incubators for, in a sense, crazy ideas or ideas that are out of the box. And those ideas can go through a system of filtration. They can be moderated and evolve into something that's actually workable. But they provide the environment for trial balloons in the best sense of the term, and can provide essentially the basis for some of these new potential agreements and understandings between India and the United States. We've already seen this, for example, my panelists mentioned with the India-US civil nuclear deal. The track two negotiations really from the early 2000s set the stage for the official negotiations between 2005 and 2008. Now, quickly on the diaspora, I have a slightly different take on this. I think that there's enough evidence from, for example, a study that was done by SAIS and Carnegie last year that shows that India-US relations are a low priority for the Indian American community, and that seems perfectly understandable. They vote on their own local bread and butter issues. So I think where the diaspora is really useful for India is in moments of crisis. We saw that during the second wave in India, where the diaspora was able to come together and a really, really important opportunity, like, for example, the nuclear deal, the diaspora can come in. The other area where the diaspora is very useful is going to be in tech cooperation. The fact that there are so many Indians involved in Silicon Valley and Houston means that and then that these people are moving between the two countries. They're often incorporating companies or branches in both countries. It means that there is you have a sort of cadre of people ready to go and engage in public diplomacy and practical diplomacy. And make those sort of ambitious deals possible. That's about it from me. I will just say that I think that we often talk about the civil nuclear deal as this great leap forward, poor choice of words perhaps, but this big advance in the India-US relationship. Though of course there's criticism of it. But I think we do need something like that again. We do need this relationship to advance once again, and not for its own sake, but because I think the situation demands it. The fact that you have this world order in flux and you have the rise of China means that we need something to keep the momentum going in this relationship. And I think that these areas around technology cooperation, around the Quad, and perhaps even arms control provide some of those opportunities. And I will just say that whatever we come up with today isn't fully formed and ready to go as a form of international organization. It will be something that would perhaps evolve over decades. Sort of like the Atlantic Charter, or perhaps many other historical examples. One example that comes to mind is Woodrow Wilson's use of academics, the so-called inquiry that helped him during the negotiations in Paris in 1919. That might not be the best examples, but I think the big difference between Paris 1919 and say Kochi 2022 is that we'll have think tanks and civil society from both India and the US making decisions about what the two countries can do together. And I think that is a fantastic role and an opportunity for think tanks and academia, as well as for the diaspora. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya. I think all the speakers in general have argued that there is great potential for civil society and diaspora into U.S. relationship or taking up the issues. But that's again usually underutilized. So let me, So the floor is open for question. I don't want to present always. Yeah. So please identify the speaker which you address the question. Yeah. You touched on something that is fascinating, I think. Thank you. Good. That is world order transition. That is something that came up very briefly in the morning session. But you are the first one actually to bring it up a little more. What worries me is that India had a 20-year period of rather very favorable global conditions, propelled by globalization, American neoliberality. India was also liberalizing. So now we are in a transition point where it's high level of uncertainty. The reason why I'm saying is that Ukraine was mentioned in the morning, but what if the Ukraine crisis leads to more escalatory patterns? You have Finland and Sweden now wanting to join NATO, and we don't know what the Russians will do. Whether they will explode a little tactical weapon somewhere in the Baltic or wherever. And this war has all the potential to be the next Afghanistan war. There is no way the West will give it up, allowing Russia to divide Ukraine, and the Ukrainians themselves won't have an incentive, but they don't have enough capacity to defeat Russia. That means it could be a decade-long or another war. Where this is going to affect India is that there will be a lot of talking points where India will have to make choices. And those choices are not going to be pleasant. And if there is a new iron curtain, and Russia and China become more friendly, I think the Indian non-alignment may have a lot of constraints. This is a fine-tuning is the problem. And then you look into Taiwan, the Chinese, if they do more massive, they may not for the next decade. The Chinese are going to play not our game that we think, because they realize that they will be the biggest losers if they join Russia and start an intense World War style operation. So India's position is in a very difficult position now because the opportunities are slowly waning for strategic partnership, and the best expectations are a lot more clearer than it used to be. You cannot play soft balancing, hedging these strategies for too long. If the Americans are going to say, either you are with us or you are in resistance. Unless you have a non-alignment sort of strategic autonomy, non-alignment too, with supporters who would support India, I don't know. So anyway, I'm saying because you prompted me to think about order transition is very difficult for an arriving rising power. And where India places is crucial for its placement in the international system, in the 21st century. Just if you want to comment on that.
Well, I actually,
Yeah, please.
I don't know how much I can comment on that because I actually agree with everything you said. I mean, I think that any transition of world order is not just going to lead to economic disruption, but it's likely to involve violent conflict as well, unfortunately. And I very important also. And I think that any shortening of relations around the United States is going to reduce India's room to maneuver. But whatever that room to maneuver may be, whether it's large or small, I'm talking here specifically about. That was the context I was saying for why I think civil society has an important role to play in India-US relationship. And if India has less room to maneuver, I actually think that in some ways the relationship with the United States will become more important, and civil society will actually end up playing, or will end up having to play a bigger role.
Okay, thank you. Any other? Let's be very brief with the questions.
Okay, thank you, sir. My name is I am working at jail, violence area, and soldiers camp. And soldiers are so many complaints, so difficult situation is Kashmir. Big mountain, air, air. That is so many difficult. I am saying this is science. I am making well peace and health. I volunteer working. That is I am studying researching where to this project for freedom of the innocent captives. This I submit after this Prime Minister and Union Embassy 2008 also. Okay, that is India, US, with democratic countries, and this together working very more contribution to peace and health. Okay, that is very appreciated. Please respect Mr. Michael and Sister Ali. That is I am this Kerala state, India. More medicinal plant protection house. Okay, that is India.
Yeah. If you have a question, please be brief with the question.
Okay.
If it is a comment, it will take.
That's project also. that in India, US also in medicinal farm making in Kerala or in India. So much as you say, India agriculture both working and this students also in more study that is very contribution in especially this in Mullapiya peace health project ഒരുപാട് നമ്മുടെ ഇസ്രായേലി അതിന്റെ സംസ്ഥാനത്ത് അതിന്റെ
Thank you. I think your comment is well taken. Please, there are other questions.
Okay,
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, Mr. Ramnath, you mentioned a very good point about the world order pass, which I agree with you wholly. Right, it's definitely on the angle. And I would like to ask you this question: that just like Nixon and Kissinger went across China, and there was a leap of faith at that point of time, I feel, and would you agree, that this leap of faith should now happen between the US and India on an economic basis? And we basically, if you look at it, there has been an informal jugalbandi in a sense between India and America, where America has the hardware, they have the R&D, and huge investment in fact, all technological achievements by and large American, and especially related to DARPA. DARPA comes out with further technology, and that is assimilated into commercial and civilian life. In the same way, in India is in software and applications and human resources. And thanks to the pandemic, it's brought about a kind of convergence of the two countries in a sense where when they sleep, we are awake, and when we are awake, they sleep. So would you agree that MSMEs and SMEs in both countries, because NNCs don't need anyone, right? The MSMEs and SMEs in both the countries collaborated by entities like, say, the Indo-U.S. Chamber of Commerce or other entities like TPR or whichever bilateral entities can bring about a convergence of the American businesses and Indian businesses to set up shop and create a powerhouse of economics that can bring about a new world order in a sense. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know the world order, but yeah, obviously there's a big economic opportunity to be had there. I just talked about.
Not audible.
Sorry, yeah, I agree that there is a big opportunity to be had there economically. And yes, civil society organizations can help industry bodies like yourselves can help in bringing together companies, and let them see what synergies exist. And these synergies exist in a lot of teams, especially like you talk about related to the IT industry, where which is not hobbled by a lot of regulation in India. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, please.
My question, today I don't seem to have used as much by also Gokuma and Amino's record. I want to get some clarifications regarding the role of civil society and diaspora in strengthening the Indo-U.S. relations. As I pointed out, almost all the civil society organizations that is operating in the USA, for example, for Ghana, for American Association of Muslims, or International Pentecostal Society, or the Federation of Christian Churches. There are so many organizations of liberty organizations. They are operating to protect the interests of the particular groups. So my question is that whether these civil society organizations, so better be called as NGOs, whether they can play a constructive role in strengthening Indo-U.S. relations in the existing social order of the globe. The second question related to the role of diaspora. As Mr. Ramnath has rightly pointed out, in the present context, the diaspora has a limited role in strengthening the Indo-U.S. relations. They are more concerned about their return. So, in that respect, my question is that how far the sectarianism or regionalism or politicization of the diaspora, Indian diaspora in US, have come in the way of creating some impediments in bettering the relationship between India and US?
Actually, they must be thankful to CPPR because as a think tank, it has given an opportunity to both the countries to seriously ponder over as to how the two countries can improvise the potentialities of relationships by utilizing the instruments called civil society organizations. The thrust of the argument is that the focus of most of the civil society organizations was different. It was not poised much for improving the bilateral relationship between the two countries. Sometimes it was cultural, sometimes, as you mentioned, it was sectarian, sometimes it was political, but it was expected to engage the two democracies. That's what I mentioned. If you leave to political leaders, they have their own agenda, and as a result of which, conflicting opinions would come out of that. If you look at the Indian political party leadership and their narratives, you find foreign policy has brought significant attention after the decline of the Cold War only. Until then, foreign policy was not a theme of debate among the manifesto. Even the manifesto of the political parties was not taken very, very seriously. The situation has changed. But instead of leaving to political parties, why not the think tanks? Why not the NGOs? Why not the civil society movements? Let them also initiate the process of understanding the two countries in terms of culture, in terms of trade, in terms of business, in terms of people-to-people understandings. Your point that whether it is an NGO or civil society that way is a very loose word. Practically, it exists in the midway between the state on the one side and the traditional society on the other. So in between you have the civil society, which includes a host of things, including NGOs. So it could be cultural, political, economical, and many other areas. As you find in the United States, many of the Indian diaspora organize their own civil society movements. But most of it are concerned with their immediate demands rather than thinking aloud about how to bring the two major countries together for future. And some of the diaspora proudly say that after Cochrane II, they could raise their head and say, yes, this is a country which can also contribute for scientific advancement. Because we have declared that our nuclear aim is for peaceful purposes only and not for military purposes. So once that has come, afterwards the prestige of both the countries have shot up. Why not these associations, whether it is national, regional, local, let them also consider the space for discussing the government-to-government relationship and people-to-people relationships. How can these be brought together? That has not taken place. To my mind, it has not taken place. Extremely during the Cold War period, that was not at all the agenda. Now there is a demand, increasing demand for debating that, and this has brought the public imagination. That is why 79% of Indian public in a recent survey said that United States is their next best country for as they appreciate. Of course, Kerala will not say that, but the public opinion in India at national level would say like that. Similarly, 75% of American public opinion also favor. So people-to-people contacts are there, and public opinion is in favor of that. So why don't we tap this opportunity and improve further? And that is where think tanks should come, intellectual organizations should come, academia should come, and some civil society organization can also contribute in this level. I myself was a functionary for a civil society called, which is not functioning now, South India Network. I was also associated with the Indian Association for American Studies. So there were many movements and associations, but most of this traditionally avoided politics and brought more of cultural, literature, and other aspects for the discussion. But now you can't avoid that. You have to consider the country-to-country relationship. And we are living in a highly disorderly world, and where the relationship with both the countries are important. And having said that, the potential for India rising as a very powerful economy for the future, it is likely to expand further. The market relationship between the two countries can also be another point of relationship other than cultural relationship. So these things are not properly taken up, and as a result of which there is complete overshadowing by other aspects rather than bringing the right kind of relationship. That is why bad publicity often dominates over the bilateral relationship, and it significantly damaged bilateral relationship.
Thank you. Dr. Harendra, would you like to respond, because that question was addressed to you as well? I think the connection is closed. Yeah, would you like to add something to that, Dr. Harendra?
Can you hear me now? Am I unmuted now? You know, there's a connectivity issue. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think I'm having this problem with the audio. And I think I am audible now. Yes, all I can add is I think the professor has already responded, and all I can add to it is, I cannot stress more on the role of academia and think tanks and discussions like what we are having today to help build synergies on various aspects. We should not politicize everything. We should not leave it to the politicians. I think we all contribute to the civil society as responsible citizens, and the role we all as individuals and collectively can play in building an opinion and in favor of any major issue, be it the H1B, or like I talked about, skilling India, creating, using US-India synergies in skill development for Indian personnel, the Indian workforce, rather than creating a class of delivery boys as Zomato has done. If we can elevate the lifestyle of the average Indian, I think that those are the kind of things, where we all can contribute and do some brainstorming. So I think that is all I would like to add at the moment. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Arti Kumar, and my question is to the entire, not a question, I'm intervention to the entire panel. Just 500 years, and it happened. Far more reach out than many countries, developed countries have made. So you have corporate nations, you have nations themselves struggling to keep up, and the people are all across what we call as a circular migration process. Yeah, I'll just quickly. And in Singapore, now studying on Indian gets married to a Chinese lady, and when India and China they are at confrontation, they talk about they wonder why is India China fighting? Can it be India? So that's where the people's narrative or the people's jersey that has to be thought of. outside the scope of the governmental space, and that's where I think perhaps can be created in a government contract. Thank you.
Thank you. One question. Not audible, please.
Yeah. So my question is to Professor Gopal. So you talked about the dichotomy of multiculturalism and multi-form. So Chomsky in his recent book was talking about the rise of Trumpism, which he left as a legacy and which continues to happen in different forms, like increasing polarization and ethnic lines. So what do you think are the implications of this increasing polarization or let's say Trumpism as Chomsky like to call it on Indian diaspora?
Trumpism is not polarized.
If I understand, comment or question was about the impact of Trumpism on diaspora. As a matter of fact, there were strong elements of polarization during the Trump period because of the protectionist policies they followed, and also the thrust of what he had given in a very powerful sense, America first. See, it's understandable that national interests are to be protected, but shallowing down only to the interest of the people, the citizens, that too in a country which evolved of multiculturalism, which is still not completed so far. Even now, people from other countries migrate to not in a sizable form, phenomenal form. So when that kind of aspects are there, if you ignite the feelings of the people that unemployment and inflation, poverty are only because of the immigrants and that recent immigrant, that will ultimately tell upon the whole balance of multiculturalism in a society. For a while, the idea was it has to emerge as a melting pot, and the melting pot to create a new national identity, what is called American national identity. But personally, I feel that it is not here. The United States has not reached that situation. Still, it has to go a long way in reaching that identity. So the nation building process is still incomplete, and that way. But at the same time, the societal integration is taking place. But unfortunately, following September 11, the Fukuyama's theory, how the end of the clash of civilization and all those polarization, it got a further strength after Trump tried to polarize further. But probably it provoked the American sense, and that is why even at a senior age, Biden was able to win the election and come out with a counter narrative to the right-wing populism and conservatives for those ideas of Trumpism. So, and finally on January 6th, when he appealed to the people to stage and capture the American Congress in the wake of the declaration of new president, I think it was something that a mobocracy can expect, not for a strong democracy. It can happen even in India, but not in America. We were shocked to hear when the outgoing president says, you capture the Congress, you capture the Capitol. That is not expected of a strong democracy with conventional values of faith, culture, and also very strong institutional balance of power. So you are right in saying that that was very strong, and even now the ultra-nationalist feelings are still there among some sections of the society. So Trumpism is not there. Thank you.
I think the time is up. Yeah, thank you all the panelists for your very clear exposition of the role of diaspora and how that figures in India, US relations, and what are the areas where we need to work on. So thank you all the panelists, and thank you India and US Consulate for making this possible. Thank you all for your very
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, panelists, not to leave. I advise Vice Advisor Shri sir, please come on to the dais and present our mentors at the level of gratitude and appreciation. All right, Dr. Mohammed, this will be the next. Thank you, sir. Now, Chair, Dr. Sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Vidya. Thanks to having the second one for participation. Thank you. Now we will take a very short break for 5 minutes for tea and coffee. I request you to take your tea and coffee and join us soon. So kindly, somebody will ask for a photo.
I started.
Hello, ma'am. Dhanasri, ma'am. This is Arvind from CPPR.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello. Hi, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah. Hello.
So I'll just check the video. Like it seems fine.
Yeah.
And you have shared a PPT, right?
Yes, I sent you
So,
the PPT, but
yes. Will it be shared from our end, or do you want to do the screen sharing?
no, I think I'll share it from